So I turn it over without further ado to Elazar.
So we're at the business portion, right? What's the bottom line? Net, what are we saying? Really, at the end of the day, what's going on here? But first, I want to start by thanking you, Joe, and thanking you, Dan. Can you hear me okay? It's all right. Stay close. Stay close. Okay. That's good. But Dan, certainly for your presentation last night and today, but really for your life's work. There's an unbelievable groundswell going on. And I believe it's due in large part to you, your work, and people like you that are just bringing the science to something we've experienced, but allowing us to believe, you know. To give you context around that, 20 years ago or so when I was at American Express, I mentioned last night I would bring in these experiments into work. Well, one of the experiments it sort of took was starting my staff meetings with a 10-minute meditation. And it was purely optional. But in due time, everybody in the staff actually chose to come, was looking forward to it. And so in due time, HR came and shut it down. So we don't do that here, right? So here we are, today 35% of US employers do that here. 35% of US employers have some form of a meditation stress reduction in their company. And the question is why? Why are they doing that? Now, obviously, one reason is, we've shown the link between meditation or mindfulness to reducing stress. And we've shown the link between reducing stress leading to happier employees, more engaged employees, better performance. As Joe was mentioning, even the science of the brain of why that happens. But is that all? That's actually quite a lot when you think about it. But there's actually more, a lot more. The question is why? Why would Harvard hire Bill George, who had an amazing career as CEO of Medtronic, and have him come to Harvard and teach leadership management through his experience in contemplative practices when he ran his company so successfully? Now you may say, well, Harvard is academia, it's a little funky stuff we do in academia, that's okay. What about hardcore Midwest manufacturing, good old USA? Why would Bill Ford say that if it wasn't for my meditative practice, I don't think I could have turned the company around during the latest economic crisis? That's a wow. Well, what about if we go deeper into the heart of capitalism, into Wall Street? Ray Dalio, who is head of Bridgewater, the largest, most successful hedge fund company in the world, he says if there is any one factor I could point to for whatever success I may have experienced, it would be my meditative practice. His counterpart, Bill Gross, who heads up the largest fixed income company in the world. I don't ask me what the difference is between the two. But he obviously is just as successful, just as powerful. He says that the reason for his success is because he's able to resist the natural tendency to look at information to prove a preconceived opinion that you have. And the reason that he could avoid looking at information that way is because of his meditative practice and his ability to have awareness and understand things as they are, not as he would like them to be, why he's successful. So why? Because it works, that's why. McKinsey just did a study, well, not just, they did a 10-year study where they looked at 1,300 successful leaders around the world. And out of this 1,300, they've picked the 100 leaders that were actually excelling within that group. And through all the analysis and research, they just came out with the book. It's called Centered Leadership. And when I previewed that book, I could tell you they could call it Contemplative Leadership and not change a word. So, I mean, one way to look at why this is happening in business is to look at where a business might be on a continuum. Like on one end is barely surviving, on the other end is fully thriving. And there are many factors that drive how you go from one end to the other. Now, at one end, obviously, you have to be surviving. So Darwin's come up several times in our conversations, so let's bring him up again. So when Charles Darwin said, you know, survival of the fittest, actually what factor was he talking about is the factor for the fittest? The strongest species, the fastest species. The smartest species? No, the most adaptable species. So to a company, right, if a company is not adapting, if the business is not adapting, it's going to be extinct, just as it is for a species. And this has always been true. If you don't adapt, you don't survive. But today, in the digital age, it's unbelievably important. Because the way we used to do business is no longer the same. The way we used to do business is the same way we used to take pictures, right? With our film camera, we'd sort of take a while to frame the picture. We would look at the data we had. We'd make this decision. We'd shoot the photo and wait a week to see how we did. And it was basically the shot has been over. Today we go and we take a photo, we look at it in real time. We look at it and then we adjust. And then when we take another photo and we look at it again, we adjust in real time. That's the essence of adaptability, but it's happening at a much faster pace. You know, when I work with my clients, I say, if you're not on the A list, your business is going to be in trouble. And what I call the A list is you act, you assess, you adjust. That's the new way of doing business. So why is meditation, why is mindfulness so important around the factor of adaptability? Well, we talked a lot that, you know, for most of us, come from the bottom part of our brain most of the time. It's not because we're bad people. It's not because we're defective people. It's because, you know, what I call is this mental gravity. There's a natural place that just brings you back down here. Well, down here, as Joe said, or as Dan liked to say, you know, the palm of your hand and your core brain, this is about survival. This is about fight or flight. Well, up here, it's about flow. Or to Dan's point, it's about integration, the highest, most optimal place you can be when you're busy trying to see and assess and adjust. This is where you want to do it from, not here. Down here, you have attachment. You know, you become attached to an outcome. This is what Bill George was saying about it. It's a natural tendency. Well, if you're attached to an outcome and the world is changing over here, you're not going to adapt. Down here, you have judgment because you're looking for control. You're looking for certainty. You're looking for protection. Well, one of the hardest things when I work with my clients is to disabuse them of the toxicity that comes in judgment and the impact it has on business. So you can see that the movement from down here to up here is a fundamental aspect of adaptability without which a business isn't going to thrive. And of course, the movement from down here to up here, whether it's the wheel of awareness or mindful meditation itself, that is the best tool we have to go from down here to up here. Let's look at another factor. Decision making, right? I mean, obviously an important aspect of how a business does is how it makes its decisions. So if you're on this continuum from surviving to thriving, you could almost say your point on that continuum is the sum total of all the decisions you've made in your business. So they've done studies. One of the areas that's actually pretty common that they look at for decision making is in this idea of the sunk cost bias, right? Which is the notion that we as human beings, when we make an investment, either financial or emotional, in a certain idea, in a certain path, we will keep sticking to that, even though when all the information and all the data tells us to let go of that. It's a natural tendency. This is what Bill Gross is saying, that I've learned through meditation to not fall for that, so I've become a very successful investor, one of the most successful in the world. So in these studies, what they did is they had a control group and they had a meditation group. And the meditation group basically, in this study, they did 20 minutes of meditation for 5 days, and then they gave both groups the same problem, same situation, testing the sunk cost bias. The control group was able to resist the sunk cost bias 42% of the time, which means the majority of the people did actually fall for the wrong decision. In the meditative group, they resisted it 78% of the time. Imagine what happens to your business if you're making a right decision twice as often as those people around you, or you're making half the mistakes. That's really powerful stuff. Another factor. What is another important factor? You start off with innovation. You know, some years ago, companies were saying that we all compete for the same resources. We all compete for the same talent. We compete for the same capital in the same markets. Our only competitive advantage is innovation. There are many studies that show how mindfulness and meditation affects in a positive way your ability to be creative and innovative. But there's one particular one that actually is very fascinating, because in this study, they tried 2 different kinds of meditation. They tried the basic focus meditation or the concentrative meditation, and they tried what they call open meditation, mindfulness. A lot of what we were practicing today when we were in the hub, that openness. And they did these 2 kinds of meditation because they were looking at creativity not as a whole, but they were looking at it in 2 kinds of creativity. They looked at creativity that is divergent, when we're looking to be creative by coming up with more and more ideas. Like brainstorming would be a perfect example of divergent creativity. And then they looked at convergent creativity, where we're actually trying to solve a problem that basically has only one answer, but it's hard to get to, the core of innovation. And when they did the study and they looked at it, they saw that the difference between the control group and the meditative group was really not that great. There was a difference, but it was pretty small. However, when they looked at it more deeply, they were able to see that when the task was a divergent task, and the meditation that they did was an open meditation, that group did significantly better than the other groups. And vice versa, when the task was a convergent creativity task, and the meditation that that group had was a focused meditation, that is significant improvement in their ability to be creative. So these are just 3 factors. And I will tell you, I'll just share a personal story, because I think studies and tests are really important and very helpful, because they give us this sense of hope and faith. It allows us to go further in places we haven't necessarily been before. But none of it matters until we have our own direct experience. And for me, I could tell you without a shadow of a doubt that my meditative practice was a fundamental part of my ability to bring creativity into my work. When I started this marketing agency, a strategic marketing agency, and our point of difference in the marketplace was creativity. That's what we did better than, our competition. And at one particular point, we were in a pitch for a new piece of business where we had gone through all the preliminaries and all the presentations, and this was really at the end part when you sort of have that CEO to CEO kind of meeting of the minds, and it's the final selection. And the CEO of this company leaned almost over the desk and said, "We're looking for a company that can think out of the box. Can you think out of the box?" I said, "What box?" Right? What box? Because through my meditative practice, for me, the experience was dissolution, right? That expansiveness came from a sense of dissolution of the boundaries that really weren't real, right? So in that process of dissolution, the box goes away. So when I teach innovation and creativity, or used to teach innovation and creativity in companies, we wouldn't be focusing our energy on how to be creative to think out of the box. We would be focusing on energy on how to be creative to dissolve the box. One of the greatest challenges to creativity is this unstated assumptions that restrict us of what the constraints might be. And when you start having a greater expansive view, you're no longer trying to think out of the box. You have no box. You're trying to be creative from up here. You can bet you're going to be a lot more successful. You know, I was getting a haircut. Not that we need to share my personal life too much, but yeah, thank you.
Me too.
And there was so I don't know what magazine it was. That's really the point of that. Inc., Fast Break, I don't know. But the cover of the magazine, recent, was the head of Pixar, or actually at this point, Disney. And he was talking about creativity. And he had 14 box office hits in a row. So he has something to say about creativity. And what he said is almost exactly what you were talking about. He said for him, and why the Pixar is so successful in creativity is because he teaches them to be comfortable with uncertainty. And that's exactly the same energy that you're talking about when you're in that place of anything is possible. But when you're down here, you can't be in that place. When you have the stress running you, when you have the fear and the competition and the meetings and the priorities, you can't be down here. And if you're not down here, your people, if you're down here, your people are down here. You know, I don't think we talked anything about sort of the virus of the negative emotions or the positive emotions. You know, on the positive side, it's fantastic. We felt it during your meditation of how it can spread. But the negative spreads too, right? Especially if you're the leader. So that kind of putting a halt on the flow, putting a halt on the adaptability and the creativity is one of the ways that business really is getting in its own way. Now, there are many other factors to talk about, like resiliency and how mindfulness and the contemplative path, leadership, balance and prioritization, and that's really a lot more than we can get into. But there's one factor that I do want to talk about, because in my opinion, this factor is probably bigger than all the other factors combined, and that's the human factor, right? And so it's very interesting, Dan, when you talk about basically we're just energy pods exchanging and transforming energy from one to the other. And so a business is, in a way, this container, right, that holds all these energy pods bouncing off of each other and the walls and everything, and that's a business. So clearly the quality of the relationships between these energy pods is going to determine where you are on that, you know, surviving to thriving continuum. Right? It makes sense that the quality of your relationship with all your constituents, the quality of your relationship with your board, with your shareholders, with your employees, your partners, vendors, your customers, if those relationships are thriving, you are towards the thriving end of the continuum. And if you're struggling in those relationships, your business is struggling. So this importance is why, you know, you brought up collaboration, which is very important, because some years ago, businesses were focused on getting better and better. The buzz, the stress that you're talking about, Joe, in business was we're going to have this intercompany competition and may the best team survive, and this is how we're going to build our business. But today it's no. We're going to have collaboration. We're one team. The interdependence of the company is so much clearer now. And from that interdependence comes a desire for collaboration rather than competition inside the company. Huge difference. This is why companies have shifted from focusing on employee productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness to employee engagement. You know, employee engagement around the world today is at 30%. 30%. It's a heartbreaker to think that we are running companies where 70% of our employees just want to get a paycheck and go home. It's a heartbreak for us as employees to have given our power away and allowed the conditions of the company to dictate how we should behave, rather than remember that we have the choice to engage or not engage. It's our choice. 95,000 hours in a lifetime we work. In this room, probably 100,000 hours. To be disengaged, it's unnecessary. That's a bit of a jag. The human factor. The human factor. So where does that fit with the contemplative practice? Well, the contemplative practice is a lot more, obviously, as both Joe and Dan have spoken. It's a lot more than just meditation and mindfulness. Another very important part of the contemplative path is compassion, right? In Buddhism, in fact, they say compassion is the second wing on your flight into enlightenment. The other wing being wisdom, for those of you who want to take off pretty soon. So between compassion and wisdom, that's how you can get into enlightenment. Very, very important factor. You know, going back to Charles Darwin. Now, I knew, as most of us know, that Charles Darwin, the theory of evolution, survival of the fittest, and really the factor is adaptability. What I actually didn't know until just a few weeks ago, that towards the end of his life, after all his work and all his research and all his insights, Charles Darwin said that, in my opinion, the most powerful instinct of the human species is the instinct of compassion. Charles Darwin. You can fast forward 100 and some odd years later, and they do a study, 10,000 people across many countries in their key mating ages. And they ask them to rank the most important attributes that they look for in a mate. And the most important attribute that they look for across countries and across genders, the number one attribute is kindness. The thing that we want most in a mate is kindness. The thing we want most in a boss is kindness. From an employee, from the company we do business, it's kindness. You know, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, if you were to ask him to put the 84,000 sutras and all the commentaries in Buddhism's total library, if you were to take that and condense it into one word, he would say kindness. My religion is kindness. So there are actually many studies that show how kindness and compassion, how they work in the brain. Dan had a very great approach to an explanation, the paradigm of the kindness and compassion helping us create an integrated brain, and an integrated brain and mind creating a sense of optimal being, of power and strength. Kindness. But we don't really need those studies, do we? We know what it feels like when somebody is hearing us and caring about us from an authentic place. We know what it feels like when we're being kind and generous ourselves. We can feel that. It works. There's good science behind it. But we are business people, so what's the bottom line? How does kindness help my business grow? How do I get more revenues from kindness? So Adam Grant, who is the youngest tenured professor at Wharton, just came out with a book and a study called Give and Take. And what he did is he looked at the most quantifiable part of business, or one of the most quantifiable parts of business, which is sales. So he studied sales forces across industries, but he put them on a profile. He profiled them into three groups. He profiled them into being givers, people who give and aren't really as focused on what they're getting. The second group were matchers, people who give, but only to the extent that they're getting. They try to keep it equal. And then the third group are takers, people who are more focused on what they're getting than what they're giving. And so he did the study, he profiled them, and he studied their performance, their absolute quantitative performance regarding quota. And guess which group came in last? Givers. It's a bit of a surprise, eh? So here's a twist. Guess which group came in first? Givers. And what he saw was, if the givers are giving because they're avoiding conflict, because they're trying to please people, if they're giving more than their limit of giving, it will catch up and it will cost them. But if people are giving from a natural state of being, from a state of integration, they will rise to the top repeatedly. So, Harvard, McKinsey, Wharton, soft stuff? I don't think so. In my opinion, this is the game-changing competitive advantage that is around the corner. And if you are here, you're already ahead of the curve. So, why? What we're saying is, if you go out into the world from the best part of you, and you connect in all your interactions with an open heart and a caring connection, you will be unstoppable, unstoppable. So do not underestimate these ancient skills and tools, and do not underestimate who you are and who you can be, and how when you change your world, you can change the whole world. So keep going, because God knows the world needs it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Elazar.